In 1782, the cobblestone streets of Graz echoed with whispers of a child whose talent was as unnerving as it was extraordinary. Liesl Weber, only 12 years old, had begun producing paintings that drew attention not merely for their technical skill, but for the macabre visions they depicted. Each canvas seemed to speak of an inevitability too precise to be coincidence. Shadowy figures loomed over scenes of blood and ruin. Fires consumed villages, and a single indistinct figure wielding a dagger appeared in every composition. Villagers, initially drawn to her artistry, soon recoiled in unease, murmuring that her hands might be guided by something beyond human understanding. The town's priests debated her moral standing, while physicians observed her with clinical curiosity, noting her unusually vivid accounts of dreams and visions that coincided uncannily with the imagery she painted. Liesl herself remained quiet, often staring at her easel as if compelled by unseen forces, her expression a mixture of concentration and fear. Some townsfolk insisted that she was innocent, a child gifted with imagination, while others warned that her work was a warning, a mark of some sinister destiny. Parish records, letters exchanged between concerned clergy and local officials, and anecdotal recollections from neighbors all point to a community grappling with the blurred line between the natural and the supernatural. Liesl's premonitory art became both a spectacle and a source of dread, drawing crowds of curious observers who left with unease shadowing their footsteps. The atmosphere in Graz shifted. Evenings were filled with hushed conversations about fate, morality, and the inexplicable. Was Liesl merely gifted, or had she unknowingly become a conduit for something far darker? Physicians speculated on neurological conditions, some suggesting heightened imagination or early psychosis, while theologians saw signs of divine warning or divine punishment. Each brushstroke seemed to amplify the tension between innocence and malevolence, between observable reality and terrifying speculation. As viewers are drawn into this world, the narrative immediately raises profound questions. Can a child truly foresee death? Are these visions coincidence, or is there a pattern woven into the very fabric of her life? By blending historical records with the eerie precision of Liesl's paintings, the story immerses audiences in a chilling tableau where psychological inquiry intersects with paranormal mystery. The town watched, worried and fascinated, as a young girl's creations foretold shadows yet to come, and the line between prophecy and doom blurred with every painted scene. In this introduction, the stage is set. Liesl Weber's life is not merely a historical footnote, but a haunting intersection of art, premonition, and the unexplained, leaving viewers suspended in uncertainty, questioning whether they are witnessing the workings of fate, the consequences of talent, or the presence of something far beyond comprehension. Liesl Weber was born in 1770 in the quiet town of Graz, Austria, a city characterized by its cobbled streets, Baroque architecture, and a social fabric steeped in both devout Catholic tradition and lingering superstitions inherited from generations past. Her family, modest but respected, earned their living through artisan crafts. Her father was a skilled woodcarver, his work displayed in local homes and churches, while her mother sewed and embroidered for the wealthier townsfolk. From her earliest years, Liesl demonstrated an extraordinary ability to capture the world on paper. Even before she could properly form letters, she painted with a precision and perspective that astonished her parents and neighbors alike. Her drawings often included the minutiae of daily life, the gentle arch of a bridge spanning the Moor River, the textured bark of a gnarled oak, the expressions of passers-by, which seemed to reveal not only mood but inner character. Yet alongside this undeniable talent, a subtle darkness emerged. While most children painted sunny landscapes or familiar animals, Liesl's art began incorporating themes of mortality and distress. Birds were sometimes depicted falling from the sky, animals injured or trapped, and shadowed figures appeared at the edges of otherwise ordinary scenes. Relatives recall that Liesl would spend hours in quiet contemplation, her eyes distant, observing both the living and the world's subtle indications of decay or danger. Her mother, though initially proud, expressed concern in letters that have survived the centuries, noting, "She sees more than a child should, and her hands bring these visions into the world." Her father, while more protective, occasionally recorded in his diary the unease of finding her awake late into the night, sketching by candlelight, muttering phrases that suggested she perceived events not yet realized. Archival records from local schools provide additional insight into Liesl's unusual abilities. Teachers noted that she consistently outperformed her peers in both technical skill and observational acuity. One teacher, Father Benedict, described in a school register, "The child's hand moves as if guided by wisdom beyond her years." Yet her subjects often lean toward sorrow, and she insists that certain images be drawn exactly as they will come to pass. These early references introduce the tension between admiration for her talent and unease over its implications, framing the psychological and mystical dimensions that would later dominate her life story. Family letters further illuminate the social and cultural environment that shaped Liesel. Her parents, devout and aware of local beliefs, oscillated between nurturing her creativity and attempting to channel her fascination with mortality into socially acceptable outlets. They enrolled her in drawing lessons with the town's recognized artisans, hoping structured training would temper her obsession with grim imagery. Yet Liesel's imagination remained undiminished. She drew from observation, intuition, and possibly, as some later interpretations suggested, premonition. In one letter, her mother lamented, "I fear the visions she captures, yet I cannot quell the fire that drives her hand. It is as if she glimpses shadows that belong to tomorrow." Neighbors also contributed to the narrative, describing a child who was gentle, polite, and observant, yet whose presence often caused unease. Local accounts speak of children's games disrupted inexplicably, animals reacting nervously in her vicinity, and the occasional adult swearing that Liesel's gaze seemed to penetrate deeper than physical appearances. These observations highlight the contrast between innocence and latent menace, a central theme in the story. Liesel was outwardly a normal child, yet the reaction she elicited hinted at an extraordinary perception of the world and the subtle forces within it. Her fascination with death was not, in the initial stages, overtly morbid. Rather, it manifested as curiosity, sensitivity, and heightened awareness. She drew small domestic tragedies with accuracy and empathy. A bird ensnared in a window, a neighbor's injured cow, or a child falling from a cart. These moments were depicted in exacting detail, with attention to expression and consequence. Friends later recounted that Liesel seemed to anticipate these events, or at least dwell upon them with a depth unusual for her age. Such accounts introduce the enduring question of whether Liesel's abilities were purely observational, psychologically heightened, or perhaps linked to something beyond natural explanation. Religious influence and societal beliefs further shaped perceptions of Liesel's abilities. The town of Graz, though cosmopolitan, was heavily influenced by Catholicism, intertwined with residual superstitions. Priests occasionally visited her home, offering guidance and admonishment, concerned that her fascination with death might draw her into spiritual peril. Some interpreted her talents as a blessing, perhaps even prophetic. Others warned of dark influences, whispering that the child might have been touched by forces malevolent in nature. These conflicting interpretations laid the groundwork for the enduring debate over Liesel's life. Was she simply gifted, or marked for a fate beyond comprehension? Letters and diaries reveal a household divided between nurturing support and careful restraint. Her parents encouraged skill development and social engagement, yet cautioned against dwelling on darker subjects or discussing her more unsettling drawings openly. Liesel's notebooks from this period, preserved in local archives, reveal an oscillation between whimsical scenes and foreboding images. Some drawings depict shadowy figures following travelers on the street. Others show villagers in perilous situations that would, in rare and coincidental cases, later come to pass. This interplay between coincidence, artistic intuition, and possible premonition challenges historians and psychologists alike, illustrating the thin line between imagination and inexplicable foresight. Peers and contemporaries further attest to Liesel's dual nature. She was both a beloved friend and a source of apprehension. Children enjoyed her company but were unnerved by her uncanny accuracy in depicting danger, while adults praised her skill, yet whispered about the chilling air surrounding her work. Teachers noted her insistence that drawings be exact, not abstract, suggesting an almost ritualistic dedication to precision. Oral histories collected decades later emphasized the lasting impact of these early impressions, cementing her reputation as a child whose talent bordered on the supernatural. By the age of 10, Liesel had produced hundreds of sketches, each a microcosm of observation, emotion, and foreboding. Her work circulated quietly among family and neighbors, admired but often approached with caution. Archival accounts, letters, and diaries reveal a tension between normal childhood development and early signs of extraordinary perception. Liesel Weber's upbringing thus presents a study in contrasts: domestic stability versus social apprehension, technical brilliance versus thematic darkness. and innocent creativity versus a capacity for anticipating misfortune. These dualities set the stage for the unfolding narrative, where her life would increasingly intersect with tragedy, premonition, and the supernatural. Through careful documentation of family correspondence, school records, and oral accounts, Section 1 establishes a foundation for understanding Liesl Weber, not merely as a talented child, but as a figure whose early experiences, environment, and innate perception blurred the boundaries between psychological development and otherworldly insight. Her story emerges as one where innocence and darkness coexist, creating a tension that captivates both historians and viewers, compelling a deeper exploration of the events that would later define her life. This intricate portrait situates Liesl within her social, familial, and cultural context, balancing historical authenticity with the unsettling implications of her art. The narrative of Liesl's early life is thus more than biographical. It is an exploration of how genius, perception, and possible premonition converge, establishing a chilling prelude to the subsequent events that will transform a gifted child into a figure of enduring mystery and fascination. By the time Liesl Weber reached the age of 12, her artwork had begun to take on a distinctly unsettling character. No longer were her paintings merely exercises in technical skill or depictions of everyday life. Instead, they increasingly portrayed scenes of death, accident, and shadowed figures moving through spaces both familiar and uncanny. Family members noticed the shift first in her private sketchbooks, often left open to pages that showed townspeople injured, livestock dying, and mysterious figures lurking near homes. One drawing depicted a cart overturned on a muddy street, its occupant sprawled unnaturally, while another showed a funeral procession in which faces were rendered in disturbing detail, their expressions a mix of grief, shock, and resignation. The technical mastery was undeniable, yet the content provoked a mixture of admiration and dread. Letters from her parents capture this duality. Her mother, in correspondence with a sister living in Vienna, wrote, "Liesl's hand creates wonders beyond imagination, yet the images haunt me. I see the town in her drawings, yet twisted by shadow and death. I fear for her soul and for ours." Her father, more practical but no less troubled, described in a diary entry how the child would often remain silent after completing a painting, staring intently as if awaiting a confirmation of some hidden truth. These early family documents illustrate the growing tension between pride in her talent and fear of what that talent revealed. Reports from local clergy add a layer of social context to Liesl's emerging prophetic reputation. Father Johann Müller, who had begun to observe the girl's work at her parents' request, noted that the images were of a nature that surpasses the understanding of a child and yet conveys truths that might otherwise remain hidden. The priest's comments were tempered with caution. He acknowledged the potential for divine inspiration, but warned against excessive fascination with such dark subjects, fearing that they might invite moral or spiritual corruption. Other members of the clergy, less charitable, whispered that Liesl might be a conduit for something unholy, a vessel through which dark forces communicated their intentions to the living. This ecclesiastical scrutiny illustrates the contrast between a rationalized spiritual interpretation and the suspicion of malevolence that surrounded the girl. Physicians called to examine Liesl offered a markedly different perspective. Reports from Dr. Anton Kruger, who visited the Weber household in 1784, suggest that the girl's behavior might be explained by neurological or psychiatric phenomena. He observed, for instance, that Liesl could enter extended periods of intense focus, remaining motionless for hours while painting with uncanny precision. Her pulse and breathing were often irregular, leading Kruger to speculate about early-onset epilepsy or a form of catalepsy that might produce vivid hallucinations or heightened perception. Letters between Kruger and colleagues in Graz reveal both fascination and unease. While some found the combination of skill and subject matter remarkable, others worried that the child might suffer from a condition capable of producing real or imagined visions of traumatic events. Here again, the narrative tension arises from the juxtaposition of rational explanation and the specter of something inexplicable. Neighbors, too, became aware of Liesl's darkly prescient abilities. Anecdotal reports describe villagers noting uncanny parallels between her paintings and events that would soon transpire. In one case, a painting depicting a fire consuming a small barn on the outskirts of town preceded an actual fire in a similar structure mere weeks later. Another illustration of a child falling from a horse eerily mirrored an accident involving the son of a local craftsman. While some dismissed these as coincidental or the product of chance observation, Others began treating the girl and her family with a mix of reverence and fear. Stories circulated, whispering that Liesel's talent might be more than artistry, that it might be a form of warning, a foretelling of calamity. These reports underscore the interplay between community perception and the formation of legend, showing how social context can amplify the impact of individual phenomena. Psychological dimensions of the first prophecies also emerge through letters and personal recollections. Family accounts indicate that Liesel experienced intense emotional reactions after completing certain paintings, crying, or becoming withdrawn for days afterward. She would sometimes insist that her work depicted real events that would happen unless certain precautions were taken, a claim that unnerved her parents and confused neighbors. Scholars analyzing these accounts suggest a blend of heightened empathy, early trauma awareness, and potential neurological sensitivity might have contributed to her ability to perceive, internalize, and externalize information in a way that appeared prophetic. At the same time, the broader cultural lens of 18th century Austria, steeped in superstition, religious orthodoxy, and fear of the supernatural, meant that such behavior was often interpreted as otherworldly rather than merely extraordinary. Early newspaper notices, though sparse, document both amazement and dread surrounding Liesel's work. A local gazette reported in 1783, "The young Miss Weber exhibits skill beyond her years, her images capturing scenes most morbid and foreboding. The townsfolk are divided. Some marvel, some fear, and some whisper that her hand is guided by forces unseen." This contemporary acknowledgement indicates that the girl's notoriety extended beyond immediate family and neighbors, entering public consciousness and fostering debate between rationalists, spiritualists, and skeptics. These records highlight the dual framing of her story: an innocent child with extraordinary talent, and a conduit of dark or prophetic visions whose meaning eluded definitive understanding. The artistic evolution of Liesel at this stage reflects the increasing intensity of her visions. Initially, simple sketches became complex compositions, blending realistic observation with imaginative elements that suggested outcomes yet unknown. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, figures assumed expressions of terror or grief not yet experienced, and backgrounds included stormy skies, foreboding architecture, and symbolic imagery, trees uprooted, birds in flight, and distant flames. These choices suggest an early, sophisticated understanding of narrative within visual art, a capacity to convey not just immediate events, but their emotional resonance and potential consequences. The combination of technical skill and foreboding content created a dissonance that fascinated and unsettled all who viewed her work. Clerical, medical, and community reactions converged in a complex cultural web. Each interpretation, divine, pathological, or coincidental, competed for authority, leaving Liesel's family in a state of tension and indecision. Should they shield her from attention, encourage her expression, or seek external intervention? The ambiguity surrounding her abilities became a source of both pride and fear, framing the ongoing tension between innocence and precognition. The stage was set for the events her art would later appear to foreshadow, with each subsequent prophetic painting reinforcing the interplay between rationality, belief, and human fascination with the unknown. Letters and diary entries reveal that by the age of 12, Liesel herself began to express an awareness of her unusual abilities. She occasionally referred to her sketches as warnings or truths, demonstrating a self-perception that oscillated between play and solemnity. Scholars analyzing these entries suggest that this awareness may have further reinforced her focus and precision, creating a feedback loop between perception, depiction, and anticipated events. The tension between personal agency and fate, awareness and inevitability, became a defining feature of her early adolescence, setting the narrative trajectory for the tragedies and mysteries to come. The combination of empirical observation, historical documentation, and oral accounts creates a layered understanding of Liesel Weber's early prophetic work. Her paintings serve not merely as artistic expression, but as cultural artifacts reflecting the intersection of individual talent, social perception, and the enduring human fascination with the boundary between life and fate. The tension between skepticism and belief, between innocence and foreboding, structures the unfolding story, inviting viewers and scholars alike to grapple with the central question: was Liesel's ability an extraordinary coincidence, a product of psychological or neurological factors, or a genuine premonition of events yet to unfold? Through this careful synthesis of sources, Section 2 illuminates Liesel's first prophecies as a convergence of childhood genius, cultural context, and the enduring human impulse to interpret the inexplicable. The narrative establishes suspense, deepens psychological intrigue, and situates her early work as both historically grounded and profoundly mysterious, laying the foundation for the tragic events her paintings would later predict. This account sets the stage for subsequent sections, where Liesel's adolescent experiences, the increasingly accurate foretelling of events, and community reactions escalate, intertwining historical reality, folklore, and psychological exploration into a chilling, immersive narrative. As Liesel Weber entered her early teens, the nature of her artwork underwent a profound transformation, marking a distinct escalation from the symbolic and generalized imagery of her earlier childhood creations to scenes of startling specificity and personal resonance. Whereas her initial canvases depicted abstract representations of death, shadowy figures, or generalized misfortune, the paintings of this period began to include recognizable individuals from Graz, familiar buildings, and even the interior and exterior of the Weber family home. One particularly unsettling piece portrayed a street corner she frequently passed, with figures resembling known neighbors depicted in distress, some carrying expressions of alarm or sorrow. Another canvas showed the family's garden in meticulous detail, yet interspersed among the familiar flora were ominous signs, dark figures lurking, twisted trees, and flames in the distance. The technical skill had matured dramatically, yet the thematic shift introduced a chilling tension between innocence and premonition. These works no longer seemed the playful imaginings of a gifted child. They appeared to forecast real events, a notion that would soon provoke profound unease throughout the town. Archival documents and correspondence from the Weber household reflect the growing anxiety surrounding Liesel's abilities. Her mother, Elisabeth Weber, wrote in a letter to a cousin in Linz, "Her hand captures all that is to come, yet we are powerless. I see neighbors and friends in her paintings, faces I know, yet they seem frozen in anguish I cannot explain. We do not know whether to shelter her, confront the unknown, or allow her this expression, though it terrifies us." Her father's diary similarly emphasizes the paradox of pride and dread. He marveled at her extraordinary talent, but feared the consequences of her unnerving foresight. These personal writings illuminate the unique psychological burden placed upon a child whose prodigious skill intersected with phenomena her family and contemporaries could not comprehend, situating Liesel's life at the intersection of artistic brilliance and existential dread. Townspeople began to react in ways that underscored the psychological and social impact of her work. Reports from neighbors, transcribed in church records and municipal notes, indicate that many avoided approaching the Weber home altogether. Children were warned not to play near the garden where Liesel painted, and merchants reportedly hesitated to visit the family, fearful of being depicted in future canvases linked to misfortune. In one account, a baker recounted seeing Liesel sketch a figure strikingly similar to his own apprentice, and only weeks later a severe accident befell the boy, leaving the townspeople whispering about her uncanny foresight. Fear, suspicion, and superstition coalesced into social ostracization, further isolating the young artist and intensifying the already charged atmosphere surrounding her family. Contemporaneous accounts from clergy provide additional insight into societal perceptions. Father Johann Müller, who had previously observed Liesel's early works, noted in a sermon that her paintings were not mere fancy, but a window into the fragile boundary between life and the unseen, where mortal understanding falters. Some priests urged caution and prayer, seeing her talent as a divine gift that required careful guidance. Others, however, suspected dark forces at work, warning parishioners to avoid temptation or contact with the girl. These conflicting interpretations exemplify the broader societal struggle to reconcile the extraordinary with existing frameworks of morality, religion, and superstition. Liesel's evolving artistry thus became a catalyst for both spiritual reflection and social fear, demonstrating how cultural context can amplify the perception of individual anomalies. Medical and proto-psychological evaluations, though rudimentary by modern standards, provide a contrasting rationalist lens. Physicians called to assess the child's health noted prolonged periods of intense focus, unusual sensory acuity, and behaviors consistent with heightened observational awareness. Dr. Anton Kruger documented sessions in which Liesel would spend hours painting without pause, her attention seemingly attuned to minute details invisible to others, including subtle shifts in light, posture, and expression. Some scholars interpreting these historical records suggest that Liesel may have possessed a form of heightened intuition or cognitive precognition, a psychological sensitivity enabling her to detect patterns and anticipate outcomes based on environmental cues. Others propose that her premonitory depictions could reflect early cognitive processing of societal anxieties and latent fears, externalized through art in a manner that appeared prophetic to observers. The tension between rationalist explanations and the unsettling correspondence between her works and subsequent events forms a central narrative driver, sustaining suspense and ambiguity. Contemporary newspaper fragments further illustrate public awareness and concern. One Gazette article from 1794 remarked, "The child of the Weber household paints with a hand that surpasses reason. Her images evoke dread even in the stoutest of hearts. Citizens wonder if the girl foresees tragedy or merely conjures it through unnatural insight." While the text exhibits the hyperbolic style common in 18th century reporting, it provides historical confirmation of the anxieties her work inspired. The press coverage magnified the social isolation of the Weber family and contributed to the emerging folklore surrounding Liesel, situating her narrative within a broader public consciousness and highlighting the interplay of reputation, fear, and artistic expression. A particularly striking development during this period was Liesel's use of cryptic dating on her paintings. Some canvases bore inscriptions in the lower margins, consisting of numerical sequences corresponding to days or months, though rarely labeled with explicit years. Analysis by modern historians suggests that several of these dates coincided with accidents, illnesses, or deaths in Graz, creating an eerie alignment between visual content and real-world events. While skeptics might attribute this to coincidence, pattern recognition, or selective recollection, the recurrence of such alignments contributed to the perception that Liesel's talent was uniquely intertwined with fate or destiny. These markings intensified both familial concern and societal fear, reinforcing the dual framing of her as innocent artist and harbinger of doom. Social isolation became pronounced, and its psychological ramifications are evident in surviving letters. Liesel herself occasionally expressed frustration or anxiety over the townspeople's avoidance, noting that friends no longer visited and that even familiar faces regarded her with suspicion. Diary entries from this period describe feelings of loneliness, coupled with a sense of inevitability surrounding her work. Scholars examining these writings suggest that the interplay between external fear and internal reflection may have heightened her focus and deepened the symbolic and literal darkness in her art, creating a feedback loop that intensified the unsettling nature of her predictions. Several accounts also indicate the emergence of personal symbols within her paintings, recurring motifs such as broken windows, twisted trees, shadowed alleys, and figures carrying torches or daggers. These symbols, repeated across multiple works, appeared to encode a narrative logic interpretable by neither lay observers nor her family at the time. Some historians argue that these motifs reflect a sophisticated understanding of foreshadowing and narrative, while folklorists interpret them as resonant with European traditions of omens and portents. The convergence of technique, symbolism, and apparent prophecy elevated her work from mere illustration to a complex, psychologically charged phenomenon, blurring the line between art, intuition, and supernatural foresight. Psychologists analyzing historical testimony propose that the combination of heightened cognitive awareness, social isolation, and intense artistic immersion created conditions conducive to what might now be termed predictive cognition, or unconscious pattern recognition. In such a framework, Liesel's apparent prophecies might emerge from acute observational sensitivity, amplified by contextual cues, interpreted through a cultural lens predisposed to superstition and moral significance. While this explanation does not fully account for the emotional intensity her work inspired, it offers a plausible intersection of natural talent, psychological processing, and social amplification. By the culmination of this period, Liesel Weber had become a figure of simultaneous admiration, fear, and fascination. Her increasing precision, specificity, and thematic darkness established her as both a remarkable prodigy and a socially ostracized child whose work appeared to straddle the boundary between observation and foretelling. Villagers whispered about her in hushed tones, clergy debated her spiritual status, physicians speculated on neurological causes, and historians, centuries later, would marvel at the detailed records of her life. The escalation in content and impact during this period set the stage for the tragic events and broader social consequences that would follow, framing her narrative as a complex intersection of artistic genius, psychological intrigue, and cultural myth-making. Liesel's adolescence thus represents the turning point where the interplay between art, prediction, and societal reaction reached a critical intensity. The combination of identifiable subjects, cryptic dates, symbolic motifs, and confirmed correlations with real events created a liminal space for her existence. She was at once an innocent child, a perceptive observer of human mortality, and a harbinger whose works challenged the rational understanding of her contemporaries. The enduring tension between skepticism and belief, rationality and dread, constitutes the core of her story, laying the groundwork for the subsequent tragic consequences and the continuing debate surrounding the nature of her abilities. The escalation phase firmly establishes the narrative trajectory, intertwining the empirical and the mystical, the personal and the communal, preparing the audience for the ultimate convergence of Liesel's premonitions, societal fear, and the tragic outcomes that would solidify her place in history as a girl who seemed to paint her own death before it happened. The summer of 1782 in Graz, Austria, became the defining period of Liesel Weber's tragic and enigmatic life. At just 14 years old, Liesel completed a painting that would haunt both her contemporaries and historians, centuries later. A depiction of herself lying lifeless upon the floor of her bedroom, a shadowy figure hovering nearby, the scene surrounded by broken furniture, overturned candles, and the ominous presence of a dagger lying beside her small hand. The technical precision and chilling accuracy of the canvas were remarkable for her age, yet the content was deeply unsettling, marking the culmination of years of increasingly specific and prophetic imagery. Within days of completing the painting, Liesel was discovered dead in circumstances that mirrored the scene she had so vividly rendered. Parish records indicate that she was found early one morning, her body positioned exactly as in the painting, the family home in quiet disarray, candles extinguished, and her beloved brushes scattered across the floor. Scholars and psychologists have long debated whether her death was accidental, self-inflicted, or influenced by another human agent, but the convergence of artistic foresight and physical reality left contemporaries and later observers grappling with interpretations that spanned rational inquiry and supernatural speculation. Immediate reactions in Graz were a combination of grief, fear, and awe. Eyewitness accounts, preserved in letters and parish chronicles, described townspeople gathering in the streets outside the Weber home, whispering both prayers and accusations. Some villagers claimed to have seen dark clouds gathering above the house in unnatural patterns on the night of Liesel's death, while others reported strange flickering lights in the windows prior to discovery. Local priests arrived swiftly to perform rites and bless the home, yet even clergy were unsettled by the precise correspondence between Liesel's final painting and her demise. One account from Father Johann Müller, a parish priest who had previously examined her artwork, notes, "I have seen many wonders, but never one that predicts itself. The child's hand has traced a truth that none of us could comprehend or prevent. Whether divine or diabolical, the portent of her passing stands, undeniable before our eyes." These reactions illustrate the profound tension between human attempts to rationalize tragedy and the weight of cultural and spiritual interpretation, revealing how collective perception can shape memory, folklore, and societal response. Psychological perspectives provide an additional lens through which to analyze community reaction. Modern scholars suggest that the combination of prior unsettling events, earlier premonitions, Liesel's increasingly macabre imagery, and societal isolation primed the townspeople for heightened emotional response. Collective hysteria, social contagion, and confirmation bias likely amplified the perceived inevitability of her death, causing residents to interpret coincidences and natural occurrences as further evidence of prophecy. Letters between townsfolk reveal a mix of mourning and terror. One merchant wrote that he could hear her brush still painting in the night, and yet she is no more. A statement blending grief, imagination, and fear. While another described avoiding the Weber household entirely, convinced that misfortune lingered in the air. The psychological impact of Liesel's final work, therefore, extended beyond her own family, permeating the community and transforming a singular tragedy into a shared social phenomenon. Folklorists analyzing Liesel's death note parallels with European motifs of doomed children, premonitory visions, and the tragic interplay between innocence and malevolent fate. Across folklore from the Alpine region to Western Europe, stories recount youths who, through innocence or extraordinary talent, foresee or enact events of death and misfortune. In these narratives, children often operate as liminal figures, straddling the worlds of ordinary humanity and supernatural perception. their presence eliciting both reverence and fear. Liesel's case embodies this archetype. Her artistic skill and psychic-like precognition, interpreted through the cultural lens of 18th century Austria, transformed a personal tragedy into a mythic event with lasting resonance. The recurrence of shadowy figures, symbolic motifs, and the uncanny accuracy of her final painting aligns with these folk motifs, suggesting that both contemporaries and later chroniclers understood her life and death as more than mere accident. Letters and diaries from family members detail their struggle to reconcile rational understanding with the terrifying implications of Liesel's final work. Her mother, Elizabeth Weber, wrote, "How could a child see her end so clearly and yet live to paint it? We raised her in love, yet even love could not shield her from what was written in her hand before the world knew." Her father, Anton Weber, similarly described the dissonance between daily life and extraordinary events. "We have lived among mortals, yet her brush spoke in tongues we cannot translate. Our hearts break not only for her passing, but for the knowledge that she knew before we did." These documents illustrate both parental grief and the cognitive dissonance faced by families encountering events that defy normal causality. The combination of evidence-based observation and mystical interpretation forms the core tension of the narrative, highlighting the interplay between lived experience, social perception, and cultural myth-making. Community response extended beyond grief into social and ritualized behaviors. Several neighbors report organizing nighttime vigils around the Weber home, lighting candles and whispering prayers to shield themselves from perceived malevolent influence. Others claim to experience symptoms of anxiety, nightmares, or unexplained illness after visiting the site. Phenomena now interpreted by historians and psychologists as forms of psychosomatic contagion, mass suggestion, or early manifestations of shared trauma. Parish records document special sermons addressing Liesel's death, warning the congregation to recognize the fragility of human life and the potential for divine or supernatural intervention. The rituals, while intended to provide solace, also reinforce the narrative of inevitability and the eerie alignment between art and fate, ensuring that her story would endure in collective memory. Accounts of nearby townspeople indicate that the shockwaves of Liesel's death transcended the immediate geographic area. Merchants traveling through Graz recalled whispers of her final painting and subsequent death, while families in neighboring villages shared rumors of otherworldly forces at work. Some chroniclers later interpreted these accounts as evidence of a moral or divine lesson, emphasizing piety, humility, or caution, while others framed Liesel as a tragic intermediary between human and supernatural realms. The multiplicity of interpretations underscores the central tension of her story. Fact and folklore, rational inquiry, and mystical understanding all coexist in the historical record, leaving no single explanation sufficient. Medical and proto-psychological observations further complicate understanding. Physicians called to examine the scene noted no signs of violence from external parties. The physical evidence suggested a sudden natural cause of death, yet there were inconsistencies. Candle positions, minor bruising on the limbs, and subtle variations in posture evoked the precise staging depicted in Liesel's painting. Contemporary doctors proposed accidental causes, while modern analysts debate whether heightened awareness, environmental conditions, or deliberate actions played a role. These conflicting interpretations contribute to the enduring enigma, reinforcing the duality of rational and supernatural frameworks. The narrative of Liesel Weber's death is inseparable from the community's reaction, which transformed a singular event into a shared legend. Her final painting, the eerie accuracy of her demise, and the subsequent social, spiritual, and psychological response coalesced into a story that has fascinated historians, psychologists, folklorists, and paranormal enthusiasts alike. Eyewitness accounts, parish records, family correspondence, and broader cultural documentation demonstrate how fear, awe, and collective memory can immortalize an individual while leaving ultimate questions unanswered. The interplay of fact, perception, and myth positions Liesel's life and death within a liminal space between reality and legend. Ultimately, the summer of 1782 in Graz illustrates the profound and unsettling capacity of human consciousness to interpret, amplify, and memorialize tragedy. Liesel Weber's death, eerily prefigured by her final painting, left the town in a state of reverent horror, embedding her story in local memory, European folklore, and modern scholarly analysis. The duality of rational investigation and mystical interpretation ensures that Liesel's story remains unresolved, haunting, and endlessly compelling. inviting ongoing reflection on the intersection of art, prophecy, and communal fear. Liesl Weber's story continues to captivate scholars, psychologists, folklorists, and paranormal enthusiasts centuries after her death, precisely because it resists definitive explanation. Even in contemporary analysis, the convergence of her extraordinary artistic skill, the macabre content of her paintings, and the precise correspondence between her final artwork and her death presents a puzzle that blurs the lines between rationality and supernatural speculation. Rational explanations remain central to scientific and historical discourse. Some psychologists and neurologists propose that Liesl may have exhibited precocious pattern recognition, heightened intuition, or a form of early neurological anomaly that allowed her to perceive events or dangers with uncanny accuracy. Studies of children with exceptional cognitive or sensory perception suggest that heightened observation can produce what appears to be prophetic insight, particularly in environments where family history, community beliefs, and social isolation reinforce attention to detail. In Liesl's case, the repeated depiction of tragic outcomes may have been amplified by subconscious cues, environmental patterns, and emotional awareness of human fragility, giving the impression of foresight where rational cause and effect mechanisms could plausibly operate. Medical historians reviewing parish records and contemporaneous accounts note that Graz, like much of 18th century Austria, was a town steeped in superstition and religiosity. The Weber family's artisanal status, combined with Liesl's recognized talent, meant that her artworks were widely viewed, commented upon, and scrutinized. Cognitive psychologists argue that the intense community focus could have created feedback loops in perception. Villagers may have retrospectively matched real events to prior paintings, selectively remembering coincidences while dismissing inaccuracies. In other words, Liesl's apparent prophecies may have been interpreted through the lens of confirmation bias and social expectation, intensifying fear and awe. Yet even within these rational frameworks, the uncanny specificity of her final painting, down to spatial arrangements, objects, and timing, remains challenging to reconcile with mere chance, leaving scholars debating whether traditional explanations suffice or if the phenomenon transcends conventional understanding. Supernatural interpretations unsurprisingly abound. Paranormal researchers suggest that Liesl may have possessed true clairvoyant abilities or functioned as a conduit between the human and metaphysical realms. Some propose that her family line carried latent psychic energy, with artistic expression serving as a medium through which premonitions manifested. Local folklore, preserved in oral histories and archived letters, references the Weber family's rumored association with mystical practices or unexplained phenomena, though historians caution against over-reliance on anecdotal accounts. From the perspective of occult studies, the alignment of Liesl's art and fate could signify either divine communication or a darker pact, an early warning system from forces beyond ordinary comprehension, codified into her brushstrokes and the images she rendered. These interpretations engage with the deep cultural archetype of the child prophet or harbinger, present in European storytelling from the Alps to northern Germany, suggesting that Liesl's experience resonates with broader societal conceptions of the uncanny and predestined tragedy. Folklorists and anthropologists emphasize the historical and social context as essential to understanding the enduring mystery. In 18th century Europe, the notion that children could access knowledge beyond ordinary perception was widely recognized, often linked to spiritual purity or divine insight. Paintings, dream visions, and premonitions were historically interpreted as vehicles of prophecy, particularly in rural or semi-urban communities where religious and supernatural frameworks dominated everyday life. Liesl's work, therefore, existed in a liminal space, simultaneously valued for artistic merit and feared for its seemingly foretelling nature. Contemporary scholars argue that the intersection of societal expectation, personal talent, and superstition amplified perception, transforming ordinary child prodigy into local legend, which then evolved into enduring folklore. In this view, the narrative of prophecy is inseparable from the interpretive lens of the community, where rational analysis coexists uneasily with mysticism. Modern investigation has expanded into archival research and digital preservation. Online communities of paranormal enthusiasts, art historians, and amateur sleuths actively dissect surviving paintings, letters, and parish documents, attempting to reconstruct timelines and assess claims. Some researchers highlight minor inconsistencies between Liesl's dated works and reported events, suggesting selective interpretation may account for perceived prophecy. Others focus on corroborated coincidences that defy easy explanation, sparking debate about probability, synchronicity, and psychic phenomena. Psychologists studying collective memory note that stories of Liesel's life are transmitted with embellishments, each retelling layering myth atop fact, yet even with distortion accounted for. The story retains a core of inexplicable alignment between art and outcome. The contrast between reason and mysticism is central to the narrative's power. Rationalist explanations, neurological conditions, pattern recognition, coincidence fail to satisfy emotional and intuitive understanding because they do not account for the precise, emotionally resonant, and culturally documented alignment of Liesel's imagery with later events. Mystical interpretations, while fearsome and compelling, lack empirical verification, leaving audiences with haunting uncertainty. This duality ensures that the story persists as a site of intellectual and emotional engagement. Viewers are compelled to weigh evidence against speculation, question the reliability of perception, and confront the limits of knowledge. Ultimately, Liesel Weber's life and death function as a case study in enduring mystery. Her artistic legacy, the eerie accuracy of her final premonition, and the complex societal response combine to create a narrative that is simultaneously historical, psychological, and paranormal. Whether explained through coincidence, neurological insight, or metaphysical causation, the story resists closure. Scholars, paranormal investigators, and curious audiences alike are left with an open-ended question. Was Liesel a gifted child, cursed, or simply ensnared in a convergence of human imagination and tragic reality? Her tale persists precisely because no single answer satisfies, ensuring that Liesel Weber remains an enduring symbol of the intersection of innocence, foresight, and the unknowable forces that shape human experience. The mystery of Liesel Weber endures because it occupies a liminal space between fact and legend, the observable and the speculative, the natural and the supernatural. Contemporary researchers continue to debate and analyze, yet the story refuses resolution. It invites ongoing reflection on the nature of prophecy, the human capacity for pattern recognition, and the ways in which communities interpret extraordinary phenomena. By leaving questions unanswered, Liesel's life and work challenge audiences to confront their assumptions, consider the boundaries of perception, and grapple with the haunting possibility that some mysteries may never be solved. Her story, preserved in paint, memory, and scholarly debate, remains both cautionary and captivating, a testament to the enduring allure of the unknown. Even centuries later, Graz recalls her name with reverence and trepidation. Museums, digital archives, and academic studies preserve fragments of her work, each piece a testament to the tension between brilliance and foreboding. Paranormal enthusiasts cite her as an archetypal figure in discussions of child prophecy and psychic phenomena, while historians and psychologists continue to dissect the interplay of environment, cognition, and social interpretation. The ongoing discourse reflects a universal human fascination with the unknown, the desire to find meaning in coincidence, to reconcile tragedy with order, and to understand whether certain individuals can perceive or even shape events beyond ordinary comprehension. The enduring mystery of Liesel Weber challenges contemporary audiences to navigate a complex interplay of art, death, psychology, and folklore. Every painting, letter, and eyewitness account raises questions rather than providing answers, leaving a narrative that is as intellectually stimulating as it is emotionally unsettling. In this way, her story continues to engage, terrify, and intrigue, offering a profound meditation on the limits of human understanding and the haunting possibility that some truths are destined to remain forever just beyond reach. Liesel Weber's story continues to resonate because it defies closure, lingering at the boundary between documented history and legend. Every surviving painting, letter, and parish record contributes to a portrait of a child whose artistic imagination appeared to transcend ordinary perception, capturing events and tragedies before they occurred. The unsettling specificity of her premonitory works, figures, locations, and sequences later mirrored in real life, challenges viewers and scholars alike to question the nature of foresight, coincidence, and human cognition. Rational interpretations propose explanations grounded in neurology, psychology, and pattern recognition, suggesting that Liesel may have possessed heightened observational skills, acute awareness of human behavior, or an early neurological anomaly that allowed her to anticipate outcomes with uncanny precision. While these frameworks provide plausible mechanisms, they cannot fully account for the eerie congruence between her art and subsequent events, leaving gaps that invite further speculation and reflection. Equally compelling are supernatural interpretations that frame Liesel as more than a child prodigy. Some posit that her abilities reflected divine insight. Others suggest ancestral or occult influences, and yet others speculate about mystical premonition or psychic attunement. Within the cultural and religious context of 18th century Austria, where superstition intertwined with everyday life, her story was inevitably filtered through lenses of fear, awe, and moral imagination. Villagers' reactions, ranging from reverent fascination to paralyzing dread, demonstrate the profound psychological impact of events that resist rational explanation. Eyewitness accounts, letters, and folklore amplified these perceptions, blurring the boundary between lived reality and collective myth. The interplay between objective events and subjective interpretation transformed Liesel from a talented child into a symbol of human fascination with mortality, fate, and the unknown. Her narrative also raises enduring questions about the power of art to convey truth beyond ordinary experience. Liesel's canvases, initially celebrated for their technical skill, became conduits for fear, prophecy, and social anxiety. Each brushstroke carries a dual significance: aesthetic achievement and ominous warning. This duality reinforces the tension between innocence and foreboding, imagination and reality, creating a story that is both intellectually stimulating and emotionally unsettling. Modern scholars, paranormal enthusiasts, and historians continue to examine her work, debating whether her visions were a product of extraordinary perception, divine influence, or a convergence of environmental, psychological, and cultural factors. Ultimately, Liesel Weber's tale endures because it occupies a liminal space where fact and myth, science and superstition, mortality and imagination intersect. The unanswered questions about her abilities, the accuracy of her visions, and the forces that shaped her brief life invite viewers to confront their own beliefs about fate, prophecy, and the limits of human understanding. Her story is a haunting testament to the enduring power of mystery, a reminder that some truths remain elusive, compelling each generation to wrestle with the unexplainable and to reflect on the fragile, enigmatic nature of life itself.